Chris Hall here with you, and we're getting ready for the University of Georgia and Vanderbilt. I haven't, I'm barely up, and the kickoff time is at 11 o'clock Central Time, 12 o'clock Eastern Time. But that's okay. It's a Saturday in Nashville as Georgia takes on Vanderbilt today. On this Saturday, October the 14th, of course, the kickoff is coming up at 12 o'clock on CBS. It's the early CBS game for the University of Georgia, ranked number one in the country. And we're going to talk a little bit here just before pregame about the University of Georgia, what's happening with the Bulldogs as we get ready for this SEC contest against Vanderbilt. Now, Vanderbilt, not to be too disparaging about the Vanderbilt football team, but they're really not very good. At least they haven't been very good so far this season. Georgia should be able to take care of business today in a good way. Of course, Georgia with a big win last week over Kentucky. And again, the game begins just in a few minutes, and I still have my coffee. I'm still enjoying my coffee this morning. What do you think about these 12 o'clock games? If you have a comment about UGA and Vanderbilt, or if you have a comment about 12 o'clock games for the University of Georgia, we understand. It's the way it is in college football. And sometimes Georgia has these 12 o'clock games. I'm not really a big fan of it, but it's not a game that really garners a lot of national attention. It gets some attention, of course, because you have the number one team in the country, the University of Georgia, playing today. But nobody really is on the edge of their seat predicting that Vanderbilt's going to give Georgia much of a game today. In fact, I think the latest spread that I saw is that Georgia is favored by 34 points on the road in Nashville. So, this game is anticipated by the Georgia fans, somewhat anticipated by, Vanderbilt fans, maybe dreaded is, more of a good word. How you doing, Benji? Good to have you with us. Go Dogs and go Journey Church of Tifton, Georgia, by the way. So here we go. Georgia. Now listen, back in 2016, Georgia traveled up to Nashville to take on Vanderbilt, 2016. And everyone was pretty confident that Georgia was going to win that game. But Georgia was shocked on that day back in 2016, 17-16. Now, I kind of sort of remember that game. It was really Georgia was not ranked number one, but they were a ranked team, and they went in, and Vanderbilt, took them out. We're not anticipating that today. If that happens today, it really will be a big shock. Georgia is 5-0 in the last 5 meetings against Vanderbilt. And listen to this, 5-0 in the last 5 meetings against Vanderbilt with a combined score of 233-33. In the last 5 meetings, Georgia has outscored Vanderbilt 233-33. In the last 2 years, Georgia has outscored Vanderbilt 117-0. Vanderbilt comes into this game yet to win in the conference. Vanderbilt is 2-5 overall. They have a 5-game losing streak. Last place in the division. Hey, Jacob, how you doing, my man? So what do you think about this game? We're going to watch it. We anticipate Georgia can, off of that big win against Kentucky. We were kind of out of pocket last weekend and not able to be with you. But what a big win for Georgia over Kentucky last week. Things really seem to come together, especially, on offense. And Carson Beck, have we settled the question now that Carson Beck is the best quarterback for the University of Georgia this year? I think probably we have. Last week, Carson Beck passed for 389 yards, 4 touchdowns, and he had a completion average of 11.1 yards per pass. Marcus Rosemy-Jack Saint had a tremendous day last week. So Marcus Rosemy-Jack Saint had 2 touchdowns. Also he had 231 yards receiving last week. Just a big day for Marcus. And so here we go, Georgia and Vanderbilt. Now, our eyes are on some other games that are happening today. Georgia versus Vanderbilt at 12 o'clock. Also at 12 o'clock on ES. But now the Georgia Vanderbilt game, by the way, is on CBS. It's the early CBS game. Arkansas at Alabama, also at 12 o'clock. That's on ESPN. So you don't really anticipate, Alabama having much trouble today with Arkansas, although, in the last couple of years, Arkansas has given Alabama some fits. So yeah, you might want to keep an eye out on that game. A big game at 3:30 in the SEC is Texas A&M at Tennessee. Now that will be a very interesting game. Texas A&M at Tennessee. Tennessee comes into the game a 3-point favorite over Texas A&M. Texas A&M with a big win last week. Also at 3:30 on the SEC network, you have Florida at South Carolina. Another interesting game. Then at 7 p.m. tonight, Auburn at LSU at 7 o'clock. And then you have Missouri at Kentucky at 7:30 on the SEC network. Kind of an interesting day in the SEC today. You have some interesting games. So let's look also beyond the SEC to some other games happening today. Syracuse at Florida State. That's at 12 o'clock. That'll be on ABC. Florida State, the fourth-ranked team in the country, riding high, of course. Syracuse taken out, really beaten badly last week by Clemson. So you don't anticipate that game being much of a game. But listen, it's college football. And even with the Vanderbilt, Georgia game, if Larry Munson was around today, and Larry Munson and Vince Dooley, if they were around today, they would be telling you every reason in the world why the Georgia Vanderbilt game was going to be the toughest game of the season, and Vanderbilt was ready to go, and it was going to be a tough game, and that's just the way they roll. But really, when you go on the road in the SEC, it can be tough. It can be tough. Now, if you're going to go on the road and play an ACC team, again, not to disparage Vanderbilt, Charlie Lee's a good football coach, and he's going to try his best to build up the Vanderbilt football program. But if you're going to go on the road to play somebody in the SEC, you probably want to go on the road to Vanderbilt. So it would be a shocker if this game was even close. Jacob says it's going to be the Bulldogs by 50. So I don't know. It could be. I tell you, you notice how Kirby Smart kind of deals with games that become blowouts. He really doesn't pour it on. And the reason he doesn't pour it on is the fact that he gives the second and third stringers plenty of playing time. Kirby's not out there going to, saying, well, we have this team down. Let's see how many points we can score. He's all about giving second and third stringers the opportunity to play, to give them encouragement, but also the opportunity for them to advance and grow as players, because somewhere down the line he's going to need them. And I really appreciate that about Kirby Smart. So a lot of times Kirby Smart really doesn't run up the score like he could. I mean, he could really run up the score in some of these games, but he doesn't do that. Let's see, at 12 o'clock, it's Ohio State at Purdue. That's on NBC. Ohio State at Purdue. It's kind of interesting. Indiana at Michigan. That's at 12 o'clock. Indiana at Michigan. Indiana, do they have a chance against Michigan in the big house? Probably not. Georgia at Vanderbilt. That's at 12 o'clock. California at Utah. That's at 3 o'clock. Oregon at Washington. That's the number 8 team in the country. Oregon against the number 17 team in the country, Washington. That's at 3:30 on ABC. That'll be an interesting game. UMass at Penn State shouldn't be much of a test for Penn State at 3:30 on the Big Ten Network. Texas A&M at Tennessee. That's at 3:30 on CBS. Again, that's going to be a very interesting game. Can Texas A&M go into Neyland Stadium in Tennessee and win that game? Florida at South Carolina, 3:30, the SEC Network. Louisville at Pitt. Louisville, of course, taking out Notre Dame last week. Louisville playing Pitt at 6:30 on the CW. The CW. I think they're carrying ACC games. Um, Auburn again at LSU. That's at 7:00 on ESPN. Arizona at Washington State. That's at 7 p.m. on the Big 12 network, wherever you can get that. I have no idea where you can watch that. Kansas State at Texas Tech. Missouri at Kentucky again, 7:30 on the SEC network. USC at Notre Dame. Going to be a very interesting game. USC at Notre Dame. Now, can Notre Dame rise up and knock off USC? Kind of interesting. That's at 7:30 tonight on NBC. That could have implications for a playoff, college football playoff implications coming up. Miami of Florida at UNC. Miami of Florida. That's at 7:30 on ABC. Now, how in the world is Miami of Florida going to recover from that debacle last week against Georgia Tech? I've watched the replay of that several times, and it's unbelievable. All Miami had to do was take a knee, and they win the game inexplicably. Mario Cristobal called a play in which the quarterback handed it off to a running back, and he fumbled. Georgia Tech recovers with 20-something seconds left in the game, and Georgia Tech comes back and wins that game. Unbelievable. And Miami, the 25th ranked team in the country, taking on UNC. That'll be at 7:30 on ABC. A lot of good football games today. UCLA at Oregon State. That's at 8:00 tonight on the Fox Network, and North Carolina State at Duke. That's at 8 p.m. on the ACC network. The rankings for this week, and we're about to let you go here. Georgia number 1, Michigan, Ohio State, and Florida State and Oklahoma rounding out the top 5, followed by Penn State, Washington, Oregon, Texas, Southern Cal, Alabama, North Carolina, Ole Miss, Louisville, Oregon State, Utah, Duke, UCLA, Washington State, and Tennessee, Notre Dame, LSU, Kansas, Kentucky, and Miami of Florida, rounding out the top 25 in college football. And, last night, okay, it got to be my bedtime. It was a long day yesterday. I was ready to go to bed. I flipped it over to ESPN before, I hit the sack. And Colorado was beating Stanford 29-0 at halftime. I said, well, okay, Colorado's got a good win, and I'll read about it when I get up in the morning. I got up this morning, unbelievably, inexplicably, Stanford came back to win that game 46-43 in 2 overtimes. Stanford scored on every possession it had in the second quarter and came back from 29 points down to win that game over Deion Sanders in Colorado last night, 46-43, unbelievably. Fresno State beat Utah State last night, 37-32. Tulane beat Memphis 31-21. Well, that's going to wrap it up for us here in our pregame show. We'll be back at halftime to get to your impressions of how Georgia's doing today. And we're going to let you get over to CBS, the early game, and go Dogs as they take on the Commodores of Vanderbilt.